Welcome to the Dialogue by WirePoints, connecting the dots between our economy, government, and people. And now your hosts, Ted Dabrowski and Mark Glennon.
Hello, this is Ted Dabrowski from WirePoints, and I'm joined by my colleague, Mark Glennon, and we're here on the Dialogue. And the big news for the day is Illinois' big record, more than $46 billion in a budget that's been passed. And there's a lot of stories to this thing, Mark, and I'm just trying to get my head around all these things. This budget, more so than any in the past, is pretty special, I guess last year's too, in that it's come during COVID. And as you and I have talked about and written about, there's $200 billion that have come into Illinois as a result of payments from COVID from the federal government, $200 billion in relief to the private sector, to the public sector. And it has done some massive, amazing, some good, some bad things for Illinois as that money's come in. And I think we want to unpack a little bit of it. So let's get started. And let me just start by saying that it's a lot easier to quote, and I'm going to put air quotes here, to balance a budget when you've got gazillion dollars coming in from the federal government that's printed lots of money, borrowed lots of money, and then sent it around the country in amounts that are far, far more than was necessary to cover what states and localities needed from lockdowns. It's overwhelmed city budgets and state budgets, and not only in direct state aid that the federal government, that the state government got from the federal government, but also in ballooning income tax receipts, sales tax receipts, capital gains tax receipts. So the state has been awash in money, and we'll go over some of that. So I guess in a sense, all that money has created what you might call some good news. Certainly, you can call it good news in the very, very short term. But I'd argue that it's very bad news in a sense over the long term, because it hides all the problems we have. It papers over all the cracks, and it delays the fiscal reckoning that Illinois will have to deal with at some point or another. So I've made a bunch of statements. Let me hand over to you, Mark. I think you wanted to make some. Let's get the good stuff out of the way, right? Let's get to the real stuff. But there are a few good things. So why don't we hit those real quick?
Yeah, this won't take long, Ted, for the good things. But they have used some of this extra money that's sloshing around to contribute to the rainy day fund. An increased contribution of $1 billion is going in this year. That needs to happen. We have had exactly zero of a cushion or a rainy day fund of any kind. That's very dangerous. We would prefer to have it be used to pay down debt, such as the unemployment trust fund debt, which has gone unaddressed. We'll talk about that later. But at least they did that. They took $1 billion of this extra cash to put it towards that rainy day fund. They also used $200 million of extra to put into the pension. That is a debt reduction of some sense, which might sound nice. Our view is that reform the pensions first. Don't throw money at a bottomless pit until you fix it. So we're just giving away leverage by throwing more money after the pension system without fixing it. And one other point, well, we'll talk a little bit about the crime bill too. Technically not part of the budget, but we had written earlier saying that to overcome the problems in Cook County, which primarily derive from Kim Foxx, the state's attorney, not prosecuting crimes that should be prosecuted, there's a possible solution, and that is shifting authority or jurisdiction over to the attorney general and making him responsible to that. Well, they did do that on a couple items. We would have liked to have seen it more broad, but there's a bill to address the smash and grabs, the giant retail thefts that we've seen, which are in the nature of conspiracies, and they've made that a special felony. It's prosecutable by the state attorney general, not just the state's attorneys in the counties where it happens, and also prosecutable by the state's attorneys in any county in which the collaborators touch, really, as part of the crime. That's a good thing. Same with they've got some legislation to address expressway shootings, and same thing there. The attorney general has been given authority to do that. This was a big effort in Virginia. They didn't get their legislation passed, but they too have had a problem with a few counties having soft on crime, George Soros-backed prosecutors in some of their counties, and this is a good way to address it. We'll see if Kwame Raoul really does these prosecutions, but a few swift, tough ones would help send out a message. And Ted, back to the budget, I really want to put a fine point on your point about how much money is sloshing around temporarily and why, because there's so much nonsense being spun this year by Pritzker saying that he's basically running now apparently as a fiscal champion, that he's righted the ship, and the improvement in Illinois' situation has nothing to do with federal pandemic relief. But as you said, that relief totals $200 billion that has come in to Illinois. It goes far beyond the direct $11 billion that went to the state. It's all the private sector money too. And if you sit down and try to calculate how much of that ends up as tax revenue, well, it'd be pretty tricky to do, so we haven't attempted it, but you could ballpark it. $200 billion and it comes in. There's a multiplier applied to that, that people don't just stick the money they get under their pillows. They go out and spend it. So, for example, when someone got CARES Act money, they go out and buy something with it. Let's say go to the store and buy something. Well, the store owner is going to benefit from it too. That's going to drive up income taxes. Sales taxes, of course, would be applied on it. And at the end of the day, you get, 10, 15, 20% maybe of all that additional economic activity, which is some multiple of $200 billion. Well, it's no surprise that tax receipts have come in real high. And that's what's driven this budget excess revenue that we're seeing today that Pritzker claims is entirely his doing. And Mendoza is even more shameless, claiming that the pay down in the state bills is because of great work done in her office. Well, no, it's not. So let's keep that in mind as we run through these things and talk about some of the bigger items in the budget, Ted, if you will.
Yeah. So before we get into any expense lines, I think it's important to cover a little bit what you just said about revenues. So here's what's fascinating. A couple points. All right. So let's go back to 2019. This is before Trump is out of office. 2019 was booming, right? This is right before COVID. The economy's booming. You've got the lowest unemployment rate ever for Blacks, Hispanics, women. Things were awesome. Now, in 2019, and this can be for comparison of the 2023 numbers that we're talking about today. So in 2019, the budget office for Governor Pritzker forecasted in 2019 that in 2023 the revenues for the state would be $42 billion, right? $42 billion. Now that was under the best economic times we've had in forever. Well, so look at this. Here we are, a recession later, massive recession, massive problems. And Governor Pritzker just forecasted in this budget $46.5 billion. So that's almost $4.5 billion more than in the best economy we ever had. So this is the point. Look at how much extra money there is sitting around, despite the fact that we had a lot of our economy closed for a couple years, despite the fact that we had all these people unemployed. We're doing $4.5 billion better in revenues. So that kind of just tells you the power of federal aid and the improved tax revenues as a result of all the money that came in for the stimulus checks and things like that. So that's one source of that money. The state also got directly $8 billion from the federal government. So it's another several billion to spend. And so what you're talking about is massive amount of money. Now, don't forget, Governor Pritzker in 2020 said that we urgently, desperately needed a progressive tax scheme that would have raised an additional $4 billion for Illinois. So, here he was saying that we needed it, that there was going to be a massive tax hike, a flat tax hike on everybody had we not gotten the progressive tax. And then a couple years later, we're rolling in the money, $4 billion. And he says, here's the important part, he says that none of this has to do with the the balanced budget quote and things like that. And the stability of Illinois has nothing to do with the federal bailout, but all to do with his actions. And we can talk about those actions in just a minute. But I can tell you this, they didn't do it.
Yeah, Ted, and it's critical to keep the context of what other states are doing with this excess money in mind. They're slashing taxes. You can find any number of stories across the country about how many of them are doing that. Not all of them are doing it, but many are. And at the end of the day, our fiscal problems are a matter of competitiveness. We want to see Illinois restored to a competitive a position in terms of total tax burden, quality of services that we get. And we're going to be facing new competition, though, as a result of this. It'll take a year at least before the rankings shake out, reflecting those tax cuts in those other states. But we have not improved our relative position, and it's probably worsened substantially. That'll become very clear after this federal money runs out. And that means the flight of people, flight of the tax base, flight of jobs is going to return with a vengeance. And it's still going on, by the way. We just had the annual census estimates come out. These are not the big 2020 decade estimates, census numbers. These are the estimates for last year, 2021. And our loss of population was already accelerating. So
yeah, 114,000, almost 1% of our population in that estimate is gone. It's fascinating. Second largest in the country, only after New York.
Teddy, one thing that I was glad to see is that the press was pretty hard about calling out Pritzker for these election year, and of course it's an election year, giveaways, which look like vote buying. And even the left-leaning columnists labeled it either with that phrase or they've called it an election year budget, basically the same thing. So there's a suspension of the sales tax on groceries. There's what Pritzker was bragging about as a cut in the gasoline tax that you pay at the pump, which in fact is merely a suspension of an automatic increase that was going to go in July 1. Now, that has caused controversy and laughter as we see it, and some of our readers have seen it. We've written about this because grocery stores and gas stations will be required to put up a sign, basically says, you're getting a tax cut here, or something to that effect, thanks to what the state has done. The taxes have gone down, and you should expect to see that at the pump, prices reduced. And same in your grocery prices. Ted, do you have any thoughts or reaction about that little gimmick?
Well, it's fascinating, right? Let's put some numbers to that. There's about 2.5 cents that by postponing that increase, Illinois won't have to pay 2.5 cents. But lost in the backdrop is that Pritzker doubled the gas tax when he passed the Capitol bill in 2019 by 19 cents. And because we have a sales tax on our gas prices, as gas prices go up, so do the taxes. So people are paying more and more. So this isn't any kind of thing for anybody to celebrate, and it certainly is deceitful to put a sign up like that saying that we're saving you money, or however they want to phrase it, at the gas pump and at the gas station, when in fact the cost for ordinary Illinoisans on a gallon of gas has gone up significantly, and to the point now where we have the second highest gas taxes in the nation. So I guess they could put a little sign that says, "Hey, we're saving you 2.5 cents. Now you're not the highest in the country; you're only second highest. Thank us."
Yeah, I think people will have some fun coming up with their own alternatives to those signs, and we'll see how long they last on the pumps, because I think people have figured this out. Polls overwhelmingly show that the biggest issues that are concerning people right now are inflation and crime. So the Democratic supermajority in the legislature knows that full well. This was a gimmick to try to appear that they're addressing inflation. That inflation, of course, was caused by their very policies to a large extent, to a primary extent, not all of it. The war in Ukraine, of course, has driven them up more recently. But it's that vast, broad inflation caused by all that excess federal spending that we've been talking about, including, the Fed pumping out some $5 trillion in new money over the past couple of years with the encouragement of the Treasury and working hand in glove with them. So they're trying to patch over the problems that they cause. And on crime, they really didn't do much. I would encourage our readers to take a look at our colleague Matt Rosenberg's article up on this, where they really came up short on this. They passed a few bills that are kind of nice, as he describes in great detail, and I have to say he has the best summary that I've seen anywhere on what they did and why it fell short. But this is all window dressing. They're pretending to address inflation and crime. And these are problems that they largely caused, and they're only putting up window dressing on it.
Yeah, let me put a finer point on that, and staying with the tax relief still, because I think there's a couple more points we need to make there. You mentioned the gas taxes. Well, the other one that's really nasty, and whoever will recall, I can't remember if it's a State of the Union speech when Governor Pritzker promised to lower property taxes. He said how bad it is. He said we have too many units of government. All that stuff. He created a commission, a property tax commission. That property tax commission could not come out with a final report. They released, I think, a draft report, never came up with real recommendations, and they never did anything. And, Governor Pritzker never got anything done on property taxes. So what he's done, though, this time around, just like you said, within the gimmicks, is he's passing a property tax rebate. It's about $500 million worth. So it's not insignificant. But what everybody's forgetting is that the state's PTEL, which is, well, let's just put it this way, the property tax caps, they allow property taxes to go up by 5%, as much as 5%, depending on inflation. Well, guess what? Inflation is higher than 5%. So guess what property taxes are going to do automatically? They're going to go up by 5%. And so once again, whatever savings Governor Pritzker is giving through the budget, it's not really savings. It's going to be eaten up by the new tax hikes that cities and governments across the state are going to do, because they're allowed to raise them by 5%. So there you go, another one gone.
Ted, when you start going through the line items in the budget, as we have started to do, both by looking at the budget and the staff analyses that are out there, your eyes will just roll. I mean, especially when you think about this claim that ARPA money, the federal money, has nothing to do with the supposed success in this budget. I mean, it lays them out specifically. There's for this coming year, ARPA expenditures now total $2.6 billion, and that's slated to go up to $3.6 billion next year. That's a lot of money, and that's directly out of ARPA money. Where is it going? There's a list of dozens of these things where you'll roll your eyes and say, what are these? The Becoming a Man program, whatever that is, Working on Womanhood program. Some of these are good programs, by the way, and I'm not knocking them. Child advocacy centers, job training, maybe good programs. But like I say, there are dozens of these that you've never heard of. And the real point is that, again, this is ARPA money that is going into things that ordinarily would be in the regular budget. Includes, support for the Special Olympics. Some of these things are new. There's a Latino Family Commission, whatever that is, an Asian American Family Commission, $4 million for each of these. It goes on. And to claim that federal money isn't funding this stuff is, I can't describe it as anything except an outright lie. And that's the direct money. That's from that $11 billion that you mentioned. All the other tax revenue that goes into the general fund is, from, as we said, the additional economic activity that has driven up these taxes and collections for everybody.
Yeah, and I want to just, I think we should post that list of grants. Like you said, when I started looking at that list, it's just a long list of grants, and I feel bad because I can't help but think of the corruption we have in Illinois, and then I hate to say this too, but let's call it the legal corruption. When you start creating all these grants, all this money flowing, I can tell you nobody knows what's going on, but you're talking about billions of dollars flowing you wonder what kind of vetting there is, what kind of auditing there is, who's enriching themselves. It's just a question that will go unanswered, but we do know that in general our corruption is really high in Illinois. So you can bet there's some corruption in there, even though I can't prove it here.
Yeah, and many of them are designated themselves as spending prerogatives of the individual legislators. And remember, all this legislation, 4,000 pages, only became available on, I think it was Wednesday night. So nobody has the time to review these or debate them or discuss them in any sense. The leadership in the supermajority Democratic Party got together and prepared this list and crams it down the throat of the rest of the legislator. Republicans, of course, complain vehemently about this, but it's to no avail. Year after year, we got the same process. There's no transparency on it. And much of what's in this, by the way, we just don't know about it. It's too long. I mean, things will come to light. We'll probably be writing about them in the weeks ahead as we discover them. The whole process is just sickening. And this is for a state that's still has a fiscal crisis and ought to be scrupulously looking over every line item in the budget, obviously.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to point out, Mark, is, and it's one that's driven me crazy for years, and Governor Rauner and others bought into the same rhetoric, is that we need more money for education. And I think it's one of the biggest problems we have in Illinois, where we're spending so much money on education and our results are below par, and that's to put it nicely. So, what we've got, one of the things we've got is we've got the government spending $350 million more automatically each year, trying to ramp up the spending back in 2017 by another $7 billion, big numbers. But here's what's missing, and people don't know, and I think we've just got to spend more time bringing this to light, is that we spend more on education than any other state in the Midwest. We spend the 8th most in the country when you adjust for cost of living differences. We spend the 8th most in the country. We spend about $16,600. Florida spends less than $10,000 a year per kid. So we're spending about, 60-70% more than Florida. And yet our results are worse or the same on pretty much everything. They do better than we do. Let's put it that way. Same thing with Indiana. Indiana spends about $10,000 and they do better than we do. So we've got this unfortunate, and this is all part of the power of the unions, the power of the collective bargaining contracts, all that. We just keep dumping more and more money. And the reality is that the results don't come. We just get deeper and deeper hole on pensions, on the budget. And it's part of the contribution to the outmigration of Illinois, because people aren't happy with the schools and they're not happy with the tax bills that go along with it.
Yeah, Ted, the total state spending, State Board of Education, in this budget is $9.8 billion. They threw in an extra $518 billion beyond those scheduled increases that you've talked about. Now that's state spending. Remember, schools are primarily funded by local property taxes. So $9.8 billion of state money out of the $46 billion budget is going to schools. We, of course, are believers in school choice, and you give that money directly to parents and let them control it. They get a good education for their kids, but that's just not happening.
And Mark, that doesn't include the pensions. That's just the
that's right.
The classroom stuff.
Yeah, and the teachers' pension, of course, is by far the biggest pension problem. It comprises about 60% of our pension problem at the state level, not a hint, not a word, of discussion about reform of the pensions. No chance of that.
Yeah. So then there's a whole lot more with this, Mark, in terms of the budget. And, I don't think it's worth going line by line. But what you can see is that everything's up. Grants are up a lot. Again, like we said, maybe a little bit of the good news is they did increase the pension payments by $300 million in this budget. They did the almost $1 billion in rainy day funds. Those are all good things. The problem is we're starting in such a deep hole that it's good. But I think a big part of this discussion has to be, and I remember a few years back, Mark, you and I started talking about this, that you were critical of these 1-year budgets all the time. These 1-year budgets, all the legislature is trying to do, and it's even kind of fake in a way, and we can talk about that too. But all they're trying to do is add up the expenses and the revenue so that they can say they have a balanced budget. but nowhere in there is there a proper capture of, did they fix anything? Did they fix pensions? Did they lower property taxes? Did they remove regulations that allow for more growth, more business growth, so we have a higher tax base? Did they stop the flow of people fleeing from Illinois? Okay, does a budget do those things? Well, heck yeah, it does, right? If the budget's a mess and it's always has deficits, it creates more debts. If it's too overwhelming for people to live here, then you end up with the kind of flight we've had in Illinois, where we've shrunk in the last decade in population, and now we had this record population drop that you just mentioned, the estimate for 2021. We need a multi-year solution that looks at all those things comprehensively and says, hey, how do we fix Illinois so that we're not always just doing these fake one-year budgets that are phony, and actually make Illinois a place that thrives where people want to live?
Yeah, and Ted, let's emphasize too that when we say this budget, it doesn't include everything, and this is really critical for people to understand. This is the general fund budget, which is kind of where most of the day-to-day business of the state goes on. But there are many other budgets that are part of the state's situation, and they can run into problems that don't get reflected in the numbers we just talked about. So, for example, most importantly, the unemployment trust fund, which is deeply in the hole. They had to borrow about $5 billion from the federal government during the pandemic. It takes at least another $1.8 billion to restore it to solvency. They just ignored that. They ignored that in last year's budget. This year, they did make a special payment that Pritzker's bragged about of $2.some trillion towards that loan that they got from the federal government. But they still owe another $1.7 billion, I believe, to the federal government.
That's right.
On that, and no solution on that. They just let it dangle. The immediate problem is that that'll have to be made up either out of the general fund, or by higher taxes on employers, or by slashing unemployment benefits, which nobody wants to do. That's just one example of the other stuff that doesn't go into this budget. The biggest one, of course, being that pension problem that you mentioned. So year after year, even with these additional payments, they underfund the pensions. And when I say underfund them, they don't even fund them enough to keep them at tread water. The uncovered liabilities grow every year. And on that, Ted, one thing that's really been overlooked is Comptroller Mendoza released an interim financial statement for the last fiscal year, quietly. It has gotten no attention, to my knowledge, at all, except that we wrote about it briefly. It shows, once again, another loss. And, as we point out all the time, when you look at the actual audited financial statements, it shows billions and billions of losses every year. It's averaged some $10 billion in losses over the last 20 years. I was shocked to see it didn't change in the last year, because last year was a banner year for the stock market, which in turn means a great year for pensions. They improved significantly because of that market performance for that year. You would think that would flow through into a positive number on the actual financial statements for the state, but it did not. In other words, even with that outsized performance in the pensions, that is usually a major drag on the actual performance of the state, we still lost money. And I forget the exact number, but I think it was $4-5 billion that was lost again, even in the last fiscal year, with no reforms in sight for this. So those pension problems are continuing to grow and grow. Scheduled contributions to them are scheduled to grow and grow. It'll continue to eat up a bigger and bigger portion of our budget. Year after year, it's already 25% of the budget. And right now, there's not a word of discussion about addressing the problem.
No, there's not. And actually, I think it's very dangerous. There's a little bit of a celebration going on. And, I've seen the press even grab onto S&P comments by, I think his name is, Mr. Kim, if I have it right, where they're saying that Illinois may be due for an upgrade. Now, S&P is the one that still has Illinois at just one notch above junk. Moody's and Fitch have both moved to 2 notches above junk. So S&P is lagging in that perspective, and so maybe they're allowed to talk about that way. But if you're the ordinary Illinoisan, and this is for me, this is the problem with these budgets is, in Illinois, an ordinary Illinoisan doesn't care about budgets. He or she cares about their prospects in Illinois, their opportunities, and the budget might be quote balanced, or it might be better balanced, or might have more money in the fund today, and certainly it does because of all that COVID relief money we talked about. But if you look at all the laws that have been passed in the last 2 to 3 years, and we have a whole list of them, we can even maybe mention a few here. There's been so many laws that have passed that will increase property taxes, or increase pensions, or eventually increase income taxes, and that's what people feel. They feel how those budgets play into their household bill, and that's the part that worries me. Especially the more that we keep hearing about COVID and what it's done to people's ability to move anywhere in the country to do their work. So if you can find a place that's more hospitable, more affordable, more free than Illinois, you certainly might consider making that move. And I don't see any more freedoms being passed in the Illinois budget. If anything, I see just things taking away freedoms and certainly increasing costs. Let me give you a couple things. We have this massive pension problem in Illinois. Pritzker says reforming pensions is a fantasy. He won't touch it. And yet he just signed to grant additional sick leave benefits to teachers. And while this set of days aren't pensionable, it in the end, it helps teachers preserve their other sick leave benefits. They have many. It's an amazing program in terms of how many sick leave days it gives. And those are pensionable. So boom, that's an increase on pensions. He also signed a bill that hikes the pension benefit of Chicago firefighters. He just granted last year, or the year before, whichever one it was, the Chicago Teachers Union has more bargaining powers than it used to have 3 years ago, meaning it can strike for more things. Well, imagine that. He's using taxpayer dollars to pick winners and losers in the EV industry. He increased Tier 2 benefits for public safety workers, so they're more expensive now, those pensions. He gave AFSCME a much more expensive new state contract. He restored 6% salary spiking for Illinois teachers. All right, I'm going to stop there. I'm at halfway of my list. But these are the kind of things that have been passed. And guess what? It's the ordinary Illinois taxpayer who's going to have to bear the brunt of that. Pritzker can brag and give his small gas tax relief, but that's the reality of what's showing up in the budgets in cities and in the state.
Yeah, and you're right about the average voter out there. They don't pay attention too much to these budgets. It is kind of complex and green eye shade stuff. They only pay attention when they get a tax bill, and it's too late then. And those are going to come. I mean, this excess cash is going to run out in a year or maybe two, and we're going to be back to the same situation we were in. And maybe Pritzker thinks he'll be long gone working in the cabinet or wherever else at that point, but Illinoisans are going to be stuck with that problem. And seemingly to me, they're increasingly kind of figuring that out because so many people have lived, on our site, Ted, of course, we got a whole diaspora of ex-Illinoisans that still follow us because they kind of can't believe what's still going on here. More and more people, it seems to me, say they're going to leave and challenge us as, why aren't you telling people to leave? Our view is, as you just said, all other things being equal, go ahead and leave. I mean, I think that's a rational answer if all other things are equal. But we think that Illinois is part of a broader problem nationally, a form of bad government that has to be stopped. And a lot of people here have reasons to be here. It's not that easy for them to just up and leave.
Yeah. One other thing that will take people off, Mark, is included in this budget is, so there's a way to block salary increases for lawmakers if they put certain language in the budget. Well, according to what I've read, there was nothing there to block that the salary increase for lawmakers. And so the lawmakers will get on average another $2,700 each. It'll be spread differently depending if you're a senator, et cetera, et cetera. But, that's just another cost. And I wish there was a better way to pay our lawmakers where they were incentivized to do things well. If they were paid by the number of people that moved net into Illinois, and maybe we subtract it from their pay if we lose people, maybe they'd have an incentive to think differently about the budget. But it's just amazing that we're going to pay lawmakers more. They have very nice, attractive pensions. They get good benefits. I know it's a tough job. Because of the way this place is set up with Madigan's rules that still exist and all that. But nevertheless, the fact they're getting paid more for a state that barely functions and is only functioning right now because of the COVID aid is just wrong.
Ted, unless you have anything else, we'll wrap things up. There's a whole lot more to talk about in the coming year, particularly Amendment number 1, which is absolute poison if it's passed. We'll discuss it more on its face. It seems to be a constitutional amendment that would bar right to work initiatives, but it goes way beyond that and would be catastrophic for the state in many ways. It's a complicated story that we're going to dig into now that the session is done. But this is going to be a big issue, as you'll see, as election time approaches, along with many other things that continue to be big issues, crime, all the rest. Ted, you have anything else?
No, that's it. So thanks for joining us, and we hope to have better news. We do have a primary in less than 90 days, so let's see whether opposing candidates can bring up better ideas than what we're doing right now. We certainly look forward to hearing new ideas and better ideas. So with that, thank you.
Take care. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you, everybody.